I know a man whose name was Joe. He was a parishioner in one of the parishes where I was assigned. And there were two things that he seemed to be an expert on. And that one was the Red Sox, the other was gardening. And he seemed to know everything there was to know about both the Red Sox and gardening. He knew a lot of other things too because he was a medical doctor by profession for many years. When I knew him, he was retired. But one time when this gospel came up, probably it would have been, actually would have been at this time of the year, and it would have been at a time that probably was not all that different weather-wise from what we're experiencing right now. Earlier in the week, we had some very cold days, and that particular morning was a cold morning. And I said to the people at the Mass, I said when I was talking about the gospel, that I don't think we're going to see our fig trees blossoming right now because we know the summer is not near. And I said actually probably most of us don't have fig trees in our yards because up to that point I thought you could only grow figs in very warm climates, perhaps in the Mediterranean or what have you, since they're mentioned in Scripture so often and also in other ancient texts as well. Well, Joe saw me after Mass and wanted to invite me over to his home one day so that I could see his fig tree. He had a fig tree in his yard and he actually did grow figs, and he actually at another time brought in some of the figs that he had grown. So you can grow figs in Massachusetts, or at least you can grow figs in Jamaica Plain because that's where he had lived. But when he was talking about his growing the fig tree, and he talked about the work that is involved with it, it really in many ways did illustrate perhaps what Jesus is getting at in our gospel today. We have Jesus speaking about noticing things that are happening right in front of us. And what he wanted people to notice first and foremost was his ministry and what his ministry was all about. And he used this example of a fig tree, which, like the mustard seed and other times he used seed examples, would have been something that people would have been familiar with. But he may have used the word fig tree for a very specific reason. Because figs were seen, first of all, as kind of a fruit that you would have when you were enjoying something. Anytime you wanted to have a good time or anytime you wanted to serve a festive dessert or what have you, it usually would have included figs. Because figs are seen as God's goodness and God's joy. And so it was a fruit that represented that. And so he may have wanted to mention it for that reason. Something else too is that figs are also seen as something that they had when there was an abundance. So it would have again been an example of God's goodness. When we hear the story of Nathanael being called to follow Jesus in John's Gospel, where is he but under a fig tree? And sometimes it has been thought that anyone who was under a fig tree was someone who was searching for knowledge and searching for truth. So Jesus is using this example of a fig tree probably to remind them of God's goodness and the outpouring of God's generosity and God's love, but also maybe too, for people who are searching for answers as well. And so he tells us to notice the fig tree. And when it blossoms, we should be knowing that summer is coming. And he wanted to be watching for his coming and what his ministry was all about. But I think there's something else about fig trees that can be important to look in this parable. According to Joe, growing a fig tree in any climate, whether it's a cooler climate like ours, or whether it's a warmer climate like the Mediterranean, is something that does require a lot of work. There has to be a lot of care for it. It has to be fertilized. It has to be tilled so that air can get at the roots. And that has to be done very regularly. And if you don't keep up that work, you're not going to have the figs. And so maybe he was also, in this parable, telling them not only to be looking for the signs of the times, but also to make sure that they were growing in their faith, that they were nurturing their faith, that they were growing in their prayer, that they were growing in their service to one another, that they were following Jesus as closely as they can, and trying to put his words into action in their lives, and in doing so, spread the gospel. And I think certainly that's something that's important for us as well, because we know that it's important for us to be strengthening our faith, to be persevering in prayer, to be of service to others, and to live an example of following Jesus Christ that others can see and learn from. Now, at this time, we're also, we might need some help with that. And, if we look at the signs of the times, there are two things that we might see. Now, today is Black Friday, so there are probably a lot of people who are shopping. Maybe even after you watched the Mass this morning, you're going to be going shopping. Or maybe you've returned from shopping if you're one of the people who was there at midnight. Or maybe if you're watching by computer or at a later time, you've returned from the malls, and hopefully you return stress-free. But Christmas is not what the signs are pointing to right now. We're about to enter into Advent. We're about to enter into a time of preparation. We're about to enter into preparing for the birth of Jesus Christ. And certainly, when the Advent season arrives, that's a wonderful time for us to be nurturing our faith, to be growing in our faith, and to be looking for the great sign that is to come, that of the birth of Jesus Christ. So these words remind us of the importance of persevering in prayer each day, and also prepare us for the upcoming Advent season.